Kingdoms that lose their sovereignty don't just fall, they vanish. Their geography becomes a ghost. Their names dissolve into the archives of empire. For 2,500 years, the northern territories of ancient Israel, the lands given to Zebulun and Naphtali, existed only as a memory, a wound in the body of the Jewish people. The Assyrians came first. They severed these territories from the living organism of Israel. The tribes were scattered. The land became the Galilee of the nations, a mixed district, foreign soil wearing Hebrew names like a mask. Through Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Crusader, Mamluk, and Ottoman occupation, this northern edge remained in what Isaiah called contempt, degraded, dominated, dark. But prophecy is not a straight line. It's a spiral returning to its source. What collapsed first would be restored first. Where darkness fell deepest, light would break earliest. The blueprint was already written in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 23, and it would be enacted with precision in the spring and fall of 1948. This is not poetry. This is the anatomy of national resurrection. Here is where Isaiah begins. And it begins not where most people expect. We don't begin at Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1. That's where most people start, rushing toward the great light, without understanding where the darkness originated. We begin one verse earlier, Isaiah chapter 8, verse 23. For there is no weariness to the one who oppresses her. Like the first time, he dealt mildly with the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But the last time, he will make it glorious, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The language is surgical. In the former time, he brought contempt. This is historical record. In 732 BCE, the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III invaded. The northern territories fell first. Zebulun and Naphtali, border regions, exposed, vulnerable, were amputated from the body of Israel. This wasn't merely military defeat. It was the beginning of a long exile from identity itself. The land remained, but its soul was extracted. For 27 centuries, these territories existed under foreign rule. They became the Galilee of the nations, a district defined by who it no longer belonged to. But Isaiah doesn't end with contempt. He pivots, but in the latter time, he will make it glorious. The year is 1948. The month is May. The newly declared state of Israel is hours old, and 5 Arab armies are mobilizing for invasion. The strategic assessment is grim. If the Galilee falls, the coastal cities are exposed. If the coastal cities fall, Jerusalem is isolated. If Jerusalem is isolated, the state dies in its cradle. The northern front becomes the hinge of survival. 3 military operations across 3 months reclaim the Galilee step by step. Operation Yiftah secures the eastern approaches in April and May. Operation Dekel takes the lower Galilee in July. And then, in October, comes Operation Hiram, a 60-hour lightning campaign that sweeps through the Upper Galilee, reclaiming Naphtali's ancient inheritance. 3 operations, across 3 decisive months, securing the Galilee completely and ending the northern front. In 3 days, the military fate of the Upper Galilee was decided, from foreign domination to Jewish sovereignty. The Way of the Sea, the ancient Via Maris connecting Egypt to Syria, is no longer an invasion route. It's a highway of return. This is not coincidence. This is restoration along the exact axis of collapse. Isaiah is revealing a pattern embedded in history. Redemption begins geographically. It begins where the wound was made. Before Isaiah speaks about kingship or peace, he first establishes geography, because redemption in this chapter moves through land before it moves through ideas. The land is reclaimed first, not the heart, not the soul, the dirt, the stone, the borders. Physical sovereignty precedes spiritual awareness. The land must be honored before the people can see light. But there's a deeper blueprint hidden in the text. At this point, Isaiah is not alone. David had already seen this same structure centuries earlier, and it reveals itself through Psalm 68, verse 28. There is Benjamin, the youngest, directing them. The princes of Judah in organized formation, the princes of Zebulun, the princes of Naphtali. This verse isn't decoration. It's a formation diagram, and every element matters. Listen to how this works. There is Benjamin, the youngest, directing them. Benjamin is named first because Jerusalem lies in Benjamin's territory. This isn't about kingship, it's about direction, leadership of movement, coordination. David sees Jerusalem functioning again as a center, not isolated, not besieged, not cut off from the nation, but actively directing the national order, sending out commands, receiving intelligence, coordinating supply lines, making decisions that ripple outward to every front. This is Zion restored to purpose, not yet to glory. It's operational, not ceremonial. The princes of Judah in organized formation. Judah appears next, described not as a crowd, but as a disciplined body. Structure, cohesion, order. Judah represents leadership, command, and continuity, the ability to hold the nation together once Jerusalem is functioning again. Judah is the spine that connects the center to the periphery. The princes of Zebulun. Zebulun is named third because its land lies to the north, along the routes of movement and supply that connect the coastal plain to the interior. Historically, Zebulun's territory was exposed, contested, first to feel pressure from every northern invasion. In these verses in Isaiah 9, Zebulun's land is first plunged into darkness, and therefore first illuminated when restoration begins. Here in Psalm 68, Zebulun reappears after restoration, no longer humiliated, no longer the forgotten edge, now standing in support of Jerusalem. Liberation has become responsibility. The princes of Naphtali. Naphtali is paired with Zebulun in both Isaiah 9 and Psalm 68. This isn't accidental. Naphtali's territory lies further north, closer to external threats, often the first line of contact with invading forces. Naphtali represents the forward defense, the tribe that absorbs the initial blow so the center can organize. Together, Zebulun and Naphtali form the northern shield. They stand between the coastal cities and the enemies descending from Syria and Lebanon. If they fall, the entire structure collapses. Now here's what matters. Why these 4 tribes? Why this specific configuration? Because this is the minimum formation required for national survival. Benjamin directs from the center. Judah provides structure and cohesion. Zebulun and Naphtali hold the northern frontier. Without Benjamin, there's no coordination. Without Judah, there's no continuity. Without Zebulun and Naphtali, there's no defense. This is not poetry. This is survival geometry. And in 1948, this ancient formation was reactivated with startling precision. The War of Independence was fought on multiple fronts, but 2 were existential: the battle for Jerusalem and the battle for the Galilee. If either fell, the state would collapse. Benjamin's role was direction from the center. The Jerusalem corridor became the command nexus, not because it was safe, but because it had to function despite the siege. Benjamin wasn't protected. Benjamin was directing while under assault. Judah's role was organized formation. The southern command structure maintained cohesion when everything was fragmenting. Without this, the war would have devolved into isolated pockets of resistance. Zebulun's role was the northern link. The Jezreel Valley was the geographic hinge. Operation Dekel, in July 1948, secured this connection, the transition from contempt to active responsibility. Naphtali's role was forward defense. The Upper Galilee stood isolated for months. Operation Hiram in October 1948 was the final reclamation. 60 hours. The entire northern border established. Naphtali absorbed the pressure so the center could hold. The success of the war depended on these four elements functioning as a single organism. If Benjamin falls, there's no direction. Chaos spreads. If Judah breaks, there's no cohesion. The nation fragments. If Zebulun is severed, the north is isolated. The Galilee dies. If Naphtali collapses, the frontier opens. Invasion pours south. When the Golani Brigade fought in Naphtali's mountains and the Harel Brigade bled on Benjamin's roads, they weren't just defending territory. They were reassembling the shattered unity Isaiah lamented in chapter 8. Psalm 68 wasn't predicting 1948. It was revealing a timeless structure. Redemption requires the fronts to unite. This unity of the fronts is what makes the light of Isaiah 9 possible. Without it, there's only darkness, fragmentation, and defeat. The blueprint was written 3,000 years ago. In 1948, it was enacted with precision. Now Isaiah moves us to the next phase, and only now do we reach the famous verse. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them the light has shined. The phrase is almost too familiar. We've heard it quoted so often, it's lost its violence. The people who walked in darkness. This isn't metaphor. This is immediate, brutal history. The reference point is 1945, the camps, the gas chambers, the industrialized obliteration of European Jewry, 6 million dead, entire communities erased, the Yiddish-speaking world decimated, the study houses of Poland and Lithuania, ash. The survivors who arrived in Palestine between 1945 and 1948 weren't walking in darkness. They had been swallowed by it. They bore the shadow of death on their skin, in their eyes, in their silence. Isaiah's description is precise, the shadow of death. Not the fear of death, the actual presence of death as an atmosphere, a geography, a lived reality. Isaiah's words are not limited to any single catastrophe, but no generation encountered the phrase, the shadow of death, more literally than those who emerged from Europe in the 1940s. Pause here, because this matters. And then, 3 years after liberation from the camps, these same people are handed rifles. They're told, you must fight now, not for revenge, for existence, for a state that doesn't exist yet, for a sovereignty that's only a declaration on paper. They have seen a great light. Notice the grammar. They didn't create the light. They didn't earn it. They saw it. It descended. It appeared. It shined upon them without asking permission. This is awareness. The land is restored first. Then the people recognize what has happened. The turning point becomes visible. But this light isn't gentle. It's blinding, disorienting. The survivors arriving in Haifa's port are thrust immediately onto the battlefield. They go from absolute powerlessness in the camps to sovereign military force in 3 years. The transition is so violent, it defies psychological processing. This is what's meant by the light shined upon them. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't rest. It was the searing, impossible realization. We are no longer stateless. We are no longer defenseless. History has ruptured. The rules have changed. History itself becomes the vessel. The highest light emerges from the deepest darkness. The people had to descend into the shadow of death so that the light of sovereignty could break through with enough force to shatter 2,000 years of exile. The light isn't peaceful. It's blinding, and it demands immediate action. At this point, something crucial changes. Verse 2 continues, "You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you like the joy of harvest, like men exult when they divide spoil." Joy comes third, not first. This is critical. First, the land is reclaimed. Second, the light is seen. Awareness dawns. Third, joy stabilizes. Isaiah gives 2 metaphors, and both are essential. Like the joy of harvest, this is delayed gratification. You plant in uncertainty. You labor through seasons of doubt. You wait while enemies threaten the borders, while the international community withholds recognition, while ammunition runs low and casualties mount. And then, yield. Abundance. The confirmation that the work was not in vain. The refugees who arrived with nothing, no possessions, no documents, no language skills, are now citizens. The settlements that stood isolated under siege are now connected by roads. The improvised militias are now a national army. The state that was declared in a museum basement is now recognized by the United Nations. This is harvest joy. It's earned through endurance. Like men exult when they divide spoil, this is survival joy. You were outnumbered. You were outgunned. You were given no chance by the military analysts. And yet, you're still standing. Not only standing, you've gained. Territory, security, legitimacy. The Arab armies that invaded expecting a quick victory are now signing armistice agreements. The siege of Jerusalem is broken. The Galilee is secured. The Negev is held. This joy isn't naive. It's not pretending the war was easy or the losses light. 6,000 dead, 1% of the entire population, every family touched by grief. But the joy is real because survival itself was never guaranteed. Joy comes after the light is seen. You can't celebrate what you can't recognize. Awareness must precede emotion, or emotion becomes delusion. The tradition calls the generation before redemption, the heel of Messiah. The heel is not refined or sensitive, but it carries the entire body forward. 1948 was not an age of prophets or spiritual giants. It was a generation of refugees, survivors, farmers, and fighters. And yet, it was precisely this heel, physically grounded, unsentimental, hardened by suffering, that God used to carry redemption into history. The light does not begin at the summit. As Isaiah insists, it begins in the darkest and lowest places. Now we come to the mechanism. Verse 3 explains how this happened. For the yoke of their burden, the staff on their shoulder, the rod of their oppressor, you have shattered them, as on the day of Midian. Isaiah doesn't compare this victory to the Exodus. He doesn't reference Joshua's conquest. He chooses one specific precedent, the day of Midian. The story is in Judges chapter 7. Gideon assembles an army to fight the Midianite invasion. 32,000 men volunteer. God tells him, "Too many. Reduce them." The number drops to 10,000. Still too many. Reduce again. 300 remain. 300 men defeat an army described as thick as locusts, so numerous their camels couldn't be counted. The victory isn't won through combat. It's won through the collapse of enemy morale. Torches, trumpets, and shouting in the night cause the Midianite camp to panic. They turn on each other. They flee. The rod of the oppressor is shattered without a conventional battle. Why does Isaiah invoke this precedent for 1948? Because the logic of the War of Independence was Gideon's logic, the few against the many. The newborn Israeli forces faced 5 standing armies: Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, with British-trained officers, operational air forces, artillery, and armor. The Jewish defenders had improvised militias, transitioning into a national army mid-war. They had rifles but limited heavy weapons. No air force at the start. Ammunition rationed. In Jerusalem, fighters were allotted 10 bullets per day. The statistical expectation was annihilation. But the rod of the oppressor shattered, not because of overwhelming Jewish force. It shattered because the Arab coalition never achieved unity of command, because logistics fractured, because internal rivalries undermined strategic coherence, because the psychological expectation of easy victory turned into shock when resistance held. The yoke, the British mandate's restrictions, the arms embargo, the international pressure to remain defenseless, broke. The staff on the shoulder, foreign domination, statelessness, dependency, broke. The rod, the assumption that Jewish sovereignty could be prevented by force, broke. The oppressor's structures collapse, not through symmetrical power, but through the rupture of inevitability. Only now do we arrive at verse 4. And Isaiah doesn't sanitize what happened. For every boot tramping in battle, every garment rolled in blood will be burned, fuel for the fire. Garments rolled in blood. The birth of sovereignty wasn't a diplomatic ceremony. It was forged in chaos and casualty. 6,000 lives lost, entire units decimated, convoys ambushed, settlements overrun and recaptured. The improvised armored vehicles that became coffins on the Jerusalem road. The verse acknowledges this. Every boot that tramped in war, every blood-stained uniform, they will be burned. Not stored, not preserved as monuments, burned, transformed, released. But notice, burning isn't only destruction. Fire also refines. It transmutes. The verse is saying, the implements of survival war will become fuel for something else, for building, for growth, for the transition from emergency to permanence. War ceases to be the organizing principle, not because enemies vanish, but because the existential threat to survival has passed. The state can now shift from pure defense to construction, from crisis to continuity. But this raises the question, why does redemption come through war at all? Here is the answer. War is not only destruction, it is the breaking of an old reality that can no longer hold what is coming next. The world of exile, its fears, its passivity, its dependence, is too small to carry redemption. So it shatters. What Isaiah describes as boots and garments burned is not just the end of fighting. It is the collapse of the exile mindset itself, clearing space for a new vessel, a sovereign Jewish state, capable of carrying national responsibility. The weapons aren't melted down because peace has arrived. They're transformed because fear no longer governs every decision. The nation can now think beyond the next battle. This transformation has not fully arrived. The verse remains partly future, but the direction is set. The path is visible. This is how redemption moves through time. Not instantly, not magically, but irreversibly. And now, only after everything that has come before, comes the verse everyone knows. Only after all of this, territory restored, pressure broken, and war contained, does Isaiah introduce the verse everyone recognizes. Verse 5. For a child has been born to us, a son has been given to us. The government rests upon his shoulder, and his name is called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. In the context of national rebirth, this child can be understood as the state itself. Born May 14th, 1948. An infant thrust immediately into war, fragile, vulnerable, surrounded by those who deny its right to exist. The government shall be upon his shoulder. For 2,000 years, the government of the Jewish people was on other shoulders. Roman shoulders, Christian kings, Islamic caliphs, Ottoman sultans, British high commissioners. The definition of exile is the abdication of political responsibility. Someone else makes the decisions. Someone else controls the borders. Someone else determines who lives and who is expelled. The definition of redemption is the return of that weight, that terrible, necessary burden of self-governance, back onto the nation's own shoulders. And Isaiah gives this newborn entity 4 names, not as distant prophecy, but as attributes manifesting in the present moment. Wonderful Counselor. The diplomacy required in 1948 was miraculous, securing recognition from both the United States and the Soviet Union simultaneously, 2 superpowers on opposite sides of the Cold War, while fighting for survival. The council that navigated those contradictions was indeed a wonder. Mighty God. Not claiming divinity, but embodying divine strength. For 2 millennia, Jewish strength existed only in study, in endurance, in moral witness. The return of Jewish martial power, the ability to defend rather than only to suffer, is the restoration of this attribute to the national body. It's the reappearance of the warrior as a legitimate expression of national responsibility. Everlasting Father. The state is not an experiment. It's not temporary. It's the reconnection to an eternal lineage. The government that now rests on the nation's shoulders is the continuation of David's line, of the judges, of Moses at Sinai. It's the restoration of interrupted continuity. Prince of Peace. This title seems contradictory for a state born in war. But the meaning of peace here is not the absence of conflict. It's wholeness, completeness, the restoration of the people to their land. Without this return, the world remains fractured. The Jewish people remain a severed limb. The 1948 war was fought for peace in this sense, to restore wholeness. The child is born vulnerable. It stumbles. It makes mistakes. But it carries the government, the responsibility, the sovereignty, the burden of decision on its own shoulders. The emergence of enduring authority, not imposed from outside, not granted by empire, arising from within, shouldering its own weight. But Isaiah doesn't stop at the birth. He continues with verse 7, which completes this entire section and reveals the ultimate destination. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to sustain it with justice and with righteousness from now and forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. Permanence. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. The government that was placed on the shoulders of the newborn state in verse 5 is not static. It grows, it expands, not through conquest, but through deepening. The authority becomes more stable, the sovereignty becomes more real, and there is no end to this process. Notice, this isn't instant perfection, it's continuous growth. The verse describes expansion without regression, authority that doesn't collapse back into chaos, peace that doesn't dissolve into renewed war, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom. This anchors the entire prophecy in concrete, historical continuity. This isn't abstract spirituality. It's the restoration of legitimate Davidic governance. The child born in verse 5 is connected to an unbroken line stretching back 3,000 years. To establish it and to sustain it with justice and with righteousness. Here's the test. The government isn't validated by power alone. It's validated by how it governs. Justice and righteousness are the criteria. This is why the verse remains partly future. The state exists, the government functions, but the full realization of justice and righteousness, the complete alignment of power with moral order, is still unfolding. From now and forever. This is the seal of permanence. Once the process truly begins, it doesn't reverse. There may be setbacks, there may be failures, but the direction is irreversible. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. The final clause is decisive. Human effort participates. Human leadership matters. But the guarantee of permanence doesn't rest on human merit. It rests on divine commitment. God's zeal ensures the outcome, not human genius, not military success, not political maneuvering. Divine resolve guarantees that what has been born will endure, will grow, and will ultimately fulfill its purpose. This is the answer to every doubt raised during the war. When Jerusalem was besieged and ammunition ran low, when the Galilee settlement stood isolated, when the international community predicted collapse, the answer was already written in this verse. The zeal of the Lord will accomplish this. Look at what Isaiah has done. The land is restored first. Zebulun and Naphtali reclaimed. The Galilee transitions from contempt to sovereignty. Then the light is seen. The survivors emerging from the shadow of death recognize that history has ruptured. Sovereignty is no longer impossible. Then joy stabilizes. The harvest yields. The spoils are divided. The state endures past its birth pangs. Then the yoke shatters. Like the day of Midian, the rod of the oppressor breaks, not through overwhelming force, but through the collapse of inevitability. Then war is transcended. The garments of blood are burned. The nation begins the slow, unfinished work of moving from survival to purpose. Then the child shoulders the government. Sovereignty returns. Responsibility returns. The weight of political decision-making, the hardest burden of all, rests again on Jewish shoulders. And finally, permanence is declared. The government increases without end. Justice and righteousness become the measure, and divine zeal guarantees the outcome. Each step prepares the next. Each is necessary. None can be skipped. Isaiah 9 is not a fairy tale of instant perfection. It's a blueprint grounded in geography, history, and blood. It begins with the land. It moves through awareness. It stabilizes in joy. It breaks the oppressor's rod. It transforms the instruments of war. It places government on the nation's shoulders. And it declares that this process, once begun, will not be reversed. The teaching of these verses is simple but unbreakable. Redemption is sequential. You cannot skip steps. Think of it like building a house. You can't put up walls without a foundation. You can't move in furniture before you have a roof. You can't celebrate the housewarming until the house exists. Isaiah shows the same logic in redemption. First, the land must be restored. Before anything else can happen, there has to be a physical place. You can't have a joyful nation without ground to stand on. The territories Isaiah names, Zebulun, Naphtali, Galilee, these had to come back into Jewish hands first. Then comes the joy. Once people return to the land, they can experience the relief and celebration. But this joy depends on that restored territory. No land, no homecoming, no joy. Then the oppressor's power breaks. Freedom from domination follows the establishment of sovereignty. You can't break the yoke until you have somewhere to be free. The military victories and independence come after the land is reclaimed. Then comes stable government. Leaders can govern once there's a free people in their own land. You need the broken yoke before you can have your own authority. Political institutions require the previous stages to exist. Finally, permanence. The throne established forever. But only after all the previous stages are in place. You can't have eternal stability without first achieving temporary stability. Isaiah isn't just describing events, he's revealing the order they must happen in. Like climbing stairs, you can't reach the top step without stepping on all the ones below it. Each stage creates the foundation for the next. This isn't about God being rigid or making us wait for no reason. It's about how reality actually works. You can't have joy about a homeland you don't possess. You can't govern a free people while still under oppression. You can't establish permanence without first achieving existence. The teaching is simple. Redemption has an architecture. Land first, then joy, then freedom, then government, then permanence. You cannot skip steps. The process is still unfolding. The light has been seen. The child has been born. The government rests on its shoulders, young, vulnerable, imperfect, but sovereign. And the promise of verse 7 stands. This will not end. This will not reverse. The zeal of the Lord will accomplish this. We are living inside this text. The work continues. The darkness was a garment. The light is the destination. Permanence is the promise. And the path between them is written in Isaiah's blueprint. Walk in it.